Oxygen Blast technical seminars are an Intertech production. For instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.
When they released Visual Studio 2008, it had to support both. Now, developers had a choice of either choosing .NET 2.0, 3.0, or 3.5. J# was dropped, by the way. J# was an interim language that was used for J++ developers, and it was extremely similar to Java. It was even closer than C# was, which is amazing. With Visual Studio 2008, of course, supporting both websites and web application projects, they wanted to be able to handle the earlier versions of .NET, so you now have the ability to go ahead and choose .NET 2.0, 3.0, or 3.5. Mind you, if you choose an earlier version of .NET, you're actually limiting the different types of projects or websites that you can create. For example, if you choose .NET 2.0, you can't create a WCF service, for example, right? ASP.NET 3.5 is actually just 2.0 with some additional libraries that run alongside of it. That's very important. So whenever anybody tells you, hey, I'm developing in 3.0 or 3.5, know that about 90% of the functionality that they're using is still .NET 2.0. If they happen to be using like the AJAX libraries, which were introduced at 3.5, great. They're using those few extra DLLs that come along with the normal 28 DLLs that make up .NET 2.0. Thus, it's safe to say the following. You know, if .NET 3.0 or 3.5 installed on a web server, it's guaranteed that 2.0 is installed as well, giving most of the functionality. 3.5 Service Pack 1, by the way, did add additional features, especially with Visual Studio 2008 Service Pack 1. For example, they gave us routing, which is used strongly with MVC now, as well as dynamic data web applications which also take advantage of routing. And then Visual Studio 2010 was released. Again, they have to carry forward both architectures, websites and web application projects, but you'll notice when you crank up Visual Studio 2010, you have the ability to create a website or web application project with any of the 4 different versions of .NET. So 2.0, 3.0, 3.5, and 4.0. Again, keep this in mind, folks. When you choose an earlier version, you're actually limiting some of the capabilities you can use. For example, if you say I want to do this in .NET 2.0, you're not going to be able to do MVC programming, right? They also changed the starting project templates for Visual Studio. One of the things you'll notice right off the bat if you've worked with Visual Studio 2008 is that when you create a brand new project or website, they don't give you a single starting page anymore. When you create a brand new website or web application project, they throw in a starting master page, a user control, as well as some of the login security controls that are available in the toolbox. And of course, those login controls make use of the provider model. So they actually give you a much larger starting set of files. If you want to start from scratch, then you have to be sure to choose the empty style projects or websites. They've also included, I should cover this as well, they also included CSS style sheet and the jQuery JavaScript library, as well as the AJAX JavaScript libraries, which Microsoft had written. So really, in the ASP.NET web application, we know that, formally speaking, if you were to go look at what you have in the Solution Explorer window, it is just going to be a loose collection of files, such as ASPX, ASCX, ASMX, all these different file extensions. Previously, it's funny, if you take a look at these files, previously with ASP, they didn't have the letter X at the end, and other than that, they were relatively the same. We had ASP files, for example. We had a global.asa file. But because .NET is so new and cool, they threw a letter X on the end because Microsoft loves the letter X. That's a separate discussion. Resources, such as images and external documents, of course, those can also make up a site, as well as that bin subfolder. And that's typically where, if it's a web application project, that's where your primary DLL is going to be placed. Or if it's a website and you have references, those DLLs will end up in that bin folder. We've also got some special ASP.NET subfolders such as themes, app browsers, and things of that nature, and app classes. And these, of course, can hold custom code or what other files we need for our ASP.NET site. Websites and web application projects. When you create a web application with .NET, and I'll use that term web application for both of them, you have to make the decision. Which architecture do you want to go with? Like, for example, at your company, if you guys have a formal build process, then you're more than likely going to prefer to use a web application project. You're going to want your web application project to build just like all the other projects you've worked on, right? You want everything to compile nicely into a nice DLL, everything to be packaged up nicely. Websites don't really build like that. Instead, wherever you build a website, it actually compiles those files and puts them into a special subfolder where .NET is installed. Like for example, if I navigate back over here where .NET's installed, let me go back up here, you're going to find a folder called Temporary ASP.NET Files. And if I go in here, you'll see several different folders, each one of these representing a website that I had created. And if I dive into one of these guys, grid site, I am going to find some compiled files in here. Now all of this stuff in here, I don't have to worry about as a web developer, but secretly ASP.NET's actually creating these for me and doing all the compilation for me. And if you actually open up one of these guys within Notepad or what have you, you would actually see the content of it calling into the C# or the VB compilers, ultimately generating these DLLs. So websites, when you create a website, you'll still have the flexibility of choosing whatever target you want. Do you want to create it on a file system, maybe on IIS, which doesn't have to have front page server extensions, so long as it's local, or an FTP server? Or if you create a web application project, well, guess what? Initially, it has to be created on the file system. You can move it to IIS if you want later on, after it's been created. Keep this in mind throughout the entire course. We always refer to web application. I always use the term web application to refer to both websites and web application projects. This is a little side-by-side comparison of what the advantages of a web application project versus a website. Like web application projects, I always like to point this out right away, lock you into one of the .NET languages. Like for example, if you create a web application project in C#, then from then on, every time you add another page, a user control master page, just classes, what have you, they all have to be in that exact same language, C#. Websites have the flexibility of allowing you to add a master page that's written in VB, and maybe a page that's consuming it in C#. And maybe that master page had a C# user control. You can just mix and match your pages with your languages all you want. Although you probably don't want to because it becomes difficult to maintain. The hardest part is just making our brains switch back and forth between different languages. If you prefer the single file model, which I'll show you shortly here, that is only supported by websites. With a web application project, for every web page you add, you actually get 3 files. One that the designer is writing source code to that we generally shouldn't be messing with, our code behind file where we create our event handlers, and of course we still have our ASPX file. Something else to keep in mind, if you're considering ASP.NET MVC, know that it is only possible to create an MVC project style with web application projects. Websites don't support MVC. Some of the other recommendations, I talked about doing a build if you're doing like TFS build or MS build or NANT. Of course, web application projects generally build better with those, especially for larger organizations who probably have TFS or something of that nature. You're probably going to want to go with a web application project. Again, adding pre-build and post-build steps, again, behaving like a project, that's web application projects. You love to see that references folder that shows you your references. Again, that's a web application project, although I'll show you how to do that in a website. During the course, if you take the course at Intertech, we actually use both. And when we do the labs at the end of each chapter, you'll actually go ahead and create a website for one lab, maybe a web application for another. We also reuse those projects later on to help build them up into a bigger site. So to create a brand new website, note that you'll click File, New Website, just like this. You'll notice that right on the actual screen there, File, New Website, websites are not projects. Projects are a totally separate menu item that's directly above website. Websites are so different, they don't even put them on that project menu. You create a website, you choose File, New Website. Versus if you want to create a web application project, then you would choose that project menu. When you choose Website, on the left side over there, you can see where it says VB versus C#, Visual Basic versus Visual C#. You have to make sure you choose the correct language on the left side before you can continue on to the menu system on the left or in the center of the screen. As well, notice because this is a website, we've got multiple target locations that we can choose from, whether it be the file system, HTTP, which is really IIS, or an FTP server. As well, at the top there, we have a drop-down menu that's letting us choose which version of the .NET framework we want to use. Note some of the different project types that are available. With .NET 4, of course, we are going to have access to dynamic data web applications, as well as WCF service, and ASP.NET reports versus Crystal reports. So these are the different types of websites that we can go ahead and create with .NET 4.0.
For more free learning resources and to see the latest lineup of our instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.